Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I was a former member of the South Carolina General Assembly just last year. And a few years ago, I worked with Shared Hope International and our Attorney General, Alan Wilson, to craft a human trafficking bill. And to Mr. Russo's point earlier about how you have to balance both the prosecution side while also being compassionate and taking care of victims, particularly minors, that was really the crux of the legislation that we did. We were considered that year to be the most improved state in the country in addressing human trafficking, but we've got a long way to go. Our Attorney General is doing a fantastic job. He actually recently spearheaded a letter with over 50, it was actually 54 attorneys general from all the states and territories about the threat of how artificial intelligence is being used to exploit children. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record Attorney General Wilson's letter and the letter from all the attorneys general.
Without objection.
Sadly, our children are constantly exploited through child sexual abuse material daily in our country. The U.S. is now the host. It's not a proud moment, but we host more child sexual abuse material than any other country in the world. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from our friend Congresswoman Ann Wagner, who's doing an incredible job on this space too, trying to update some of our laws.
Without objection.
Look, online platforms, by design maybe, are created, and kids spend an inordinate amount of time, 7 to 8 hours a day online. They get addicted to these apps. They're on their phones constantly. I think the mission here is to protect our kids from things that they see, things that happen online, the grooming that takes place. Earlier this year, I introduced the Targeting Child Predators Act to help in this effort. Would it surprise this body to know that if you are an internet service provider and you receive a subpoena, that you actually let the individual know that you're trying to subpoena, that law enforcement's looking at them? So we're trying to put a stop to that. This is just one avenue, I think, that we've talked about that would have a meaningful effect on this. Ms. Basham, South Carolina, and I'm just going to use my state as an example, but this is really everywhere. We have in my district specifically, it's very rural, but it's also a heavily tourist economy. We have the beach. What kinds of trends in child exploitation do you generally find in tourist areas?
Well, tourist areas specifically are always hotspots, but I will say this, I actually think sexual exploitation, this is one of the unique things, it happens everywhere. And so it really is a borderless crime. Tourist hotspots obviously leave children more vulnerable because people are there to vacation, they tend to be intoxicated, and so that actually can increase some of it too.
Thank you. And can you talk a little bit more about how vulnerable populations, such as foster youth or unaccompanied minors, are more susceptible to being victims of these crimes?
Well, I think there are a number of populations that are really susceptible because of any vulnerabilities. And so when you are detached from your family and you are an unaccompanied minor, you're vulnerable to several different things. And one of those would be someone who poses as a family member, a trusted friend, an adult, that leaves you vulnerable to actually participating in a gang or actually being trafficked yourself and exploited yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Pizzurro, I want to turn to you real quick. Last year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children Cyber Tip Line received 32 million reports of suspected child exploitation online. In your experience, I think you testified, social media companies are not properly censoring that material or regulating that material, are they?
No, and if you go further, and that's where the Apple, out of the 32 million tips, Apple had 175 last year. So what does Apple have? 58% of the market share in the U.S. for iPhones. So, I think that's, and it's not just calling out Apple, it's just it's the industry as a whole.
Well, I think you're actually heading exactly where I wanted to go here, because to me, when I'm looking at Facebooks and Googles and Instagrams, the gulf between maybe the top reporter and the bottom is just so wide. Facebook had 21 million, but Apple had 234. Can you touch on that contrast? How, it's kind of crazy to me. I mean, social media companies will censor our own speech, but they won't get this stuff off their platforms. So talk about the privacy concerns, I guess, from what are they talking about? What are they alleging from a privacy perspective as to why they will not fight back against child sexual abuse material on their platforms?
Well, they moved that they can't see it on their platform. So if you go to end-to-end encryption where you have basically both sides where that data is there, they're saying that we can't see it. So again, they're not even scanning for that. So the challenge becomes is that they're totally dark. So the idea is that if I don't know what's happening on my platform, then technically I don't have to report it. So what happens is then other companies do the direct opposite. If it's something, then I'm going to report it. So that is really the disparity between Meta and Apple as an example.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning.